person whom you're trying to reach is currently unavailable. Please leave a message after the beep.
All right, folks, Roland Martin here, broadcasting live from Los Angeles. Today is Friday, October 19th, 2018. We've got a packed show for you, including early voting surges, but voter purges could steal the election from Stacey Abrams in Georgia. Two major investigative reports on voter suppression came out today. We'll have the journalist Greg Pallas, who wrote one of them, right here on Roland Martin Unfiltered. Also, Abrams' opponent Brian Kemp just took down a video he posted 2 years ago that left the distinct impression that it is easy for white males to vote and not so easy for black folks. He took it down, but we've got it, and you'll see it. Also, you will also hear an absolutely despicable radio ad running in support of a Republican congressman in Arkansas. Worst of all, it was produced and paid for by a political action committee run by an African-American man. Trust me, you will find it grossly offensive. The Russians, they continue to try to impact our elections using race to divide Americans before the midterms. A Russia expert, a black Russian expert, is here to tell us how to avoid falling into their traps. And again, Donald Trump has done nothing to stop Russian interference. And on the other side of the fence, we'll talk to the woman who co-founded a political action committee to support black women running for office. We'll talk to her live. Also, President Barack Obama is out with a new video breaking down the excuses people have for voting. Y'all know also I was in Memphis for the National Civil Rights Museum Freedom Award ceremony. Reverend Jesse Jackson Sr. was an honoree and will have some of his great acceptance speech. Plus, the author of the book, Race News, Black Journalists and the Fight for Racial Justice in the 20th Century, is here as part of our series on how the black press impacted civil rights. Folks, it's time to bring the funk on Roland Martin Unfiltered. Live from L.A., let's go.
He's got it. Whatever the miss, he's on it. Whatever it is, he's got the scoop, the fact, the find. And when it breaks, he's right on time and it's rolling. Best believe he's knowing. Putting it down from sports to news to politics. With entertainment just for kicks, he's rolling. It's on go, roll, y'all. It's Roland Martin, rolling with Roland now. He's funk, he's fresh, he's real, the best, you know he's Roland Martin now. Martin.
Folks, Election Day, 17 days away, but early voting and mail-in voting are already breaking records around the nation. There is a ton of enthusiasm, but we don't really know whether those voters are more Democrats or more Republicans. The New York Times reports that Democrats have eliminated the turnout deficit that hobbled them during the Obama era, but the surge is centered in white suburban districts. Now, let's keep in mind, 53% of white women voted for Donald Trump in 2016. White college-educated voters also voted for Donald Trump, but polling data shows he has been losing white college-educated voters and white women anywhere from 18 to 30%. Keep in mind, people of color and young people also are not enthusiastic as educated white folks as well. Now, in Georgia, we've seen significant issues there as well. Major voter enthusiasm, and Republicans are doing their best to try to stop that. Folks, the voter suppression they have enacted is deep and wide. 53,000 overwhelmingly majority black voter registrations in Georgia are on a hold right now, and they're the subject of a lawsuit. But an investigation by American Public Media, APM, found that Georgia and some other states are purging voters from the rolls for not voting. In Georgia, the number is about 107,000. Here's what the report said, quote, "There's indication that purges have disproportionately affected minority voters in some places. Analyzing all the Georgians purged in 2017, APM reports found that in 6 of every 10 counties across Georgia, black voters were canceled at a higher rate than their white peers for inactivity. And in more than a quarter of those counties, black voters were removed at a rate 1.25 times higher than their white peers." Now remember, in Georgia, Stacey Abrams' opponent is the Secretary of State, Brian Kemp, the man that controls the voting rolls. He also, of course, did not recuse himself or resign. Now, previous folks who ran for governor, who was Secretary of State, they did so, but he chose not to do so. Now remember, the U.S. Justice Department used to make sure stuff like this didn't happen, but when the Supreme Court voided Section 4 of the Voting Rights Act in Shelby v. Holder, that threw the door open for these southern states to do whatever they wanted without any DOJ intervention. Now, you have civil rights organizations who are filing lawsuits against these various states to stop them from doing so. But here's where the Supreme Court comes in as well. And this is where, by the Republicans preventing Merrick Garland from getting a hearing and a vote, helped them. In the Ohio case, a white man from Ohio sued the state because he was purged from the voting rolls. He was combating an Ohio law that allowed them to do so. What do you think happened? That case went to the Supreme Court, and a 5-4 ruling, the Supreme Court, the Republican conservative Supreme Court, allowed voting purging to take place. As a result, states all across the country followed Ohio's lead, and they've been purging people who have been inactive for 1 or more election cycles. Here's some more of the American Public Media report. Quote, "Of the most common voter suppression tactics studied this year by the U.S. Commission on Civil Rights, a federal agency, voter ID laws, proof of citizenship requirements, purges, cuts in early voting, and polling place enclosures, Georgia is the only state once under federal oversight to have adopted all 5. But that's not the only investigative report and lawsuit today in Georgia. The man behind the report and the lawsuit is Greg Palast, an investigative journalist. He joins us right now. Greg, what we are seeing here, and we've talked about this, and I've covered this for years as a journalist. This is clear and precise efforts by Republicans to try to keep as many people as possible, shave them off the voting rolls in order for them to be able to compete with the surge of black voters, Latino voters, and young voters.
All right,
can Greg hear me? 'Cause I can't hear Greg. So folks, talk to me. Can Greg hear me? All right, folks, for some reason, we can't hear Greg Palast, so hold tight 1 second. We're going to come back to Greg once we figure out Greg's audio issues. We can see Greg, but we cannot hear Greg. All right, folks, now, Brian Kemp, of course, who is the Secretary of State there in Georgia. Give me 1 second. See Greg. Secretary of State in Georgia, folks, he is the one who is behind these efforts. Now, check this out. He released a PSA 2 years ago about voter ID. We want you to watch this video. I want you to see who can vote in his video and who cannot vote. Press play.
At a designated advanced voting location, the process is exactly the same as voting in person on Election Day. You will complete and sign a voter certificate, provide an acceptable form of photo identification, and then vote on an electronic voting machine. If you don't have an acceptable form of photo identification when you're at the polling location, both on Election Day and during advanced voting, you can vote a provisional ballot. If you vote a provisional ballot, you have 3 days after Election Day to return to your county elections office to show your photo identification for your ballot to be accepted and counted. If you don't return, your ballot will be rejected and it will not count. Please note that all election-related forms and materials, including ballots, are available in English only. For more information, please visit our website at sos.ga.gov/elections or call us at 404-656-2871 if you have any questions. This is a public service of Georgia Secretary of State Brian P. Kemp.
Now, again, you see that ad where the white voter, the white person in the ad could vote, but the African-American could not. Well, Brian Kemp got lots of criticism. That ad has been taken down off of social media. Now, also, folks, we're spending a lot of time on Georgia because, again, Stacey Abrams could become the first African-American female governor in American history. Also, the second African-American to be governor of a southern state. You also, of course, have Andrew Gillum, who's running in Florida, and Ben Jealous, who's running in Maryland. Now, Brian Kemp is one of the worst offenders when it comes to voter suppression, but of course, he did not wait until the election. He has been doing these things over and over and over again, and so we're going to stay on top of this constantly. And again, what is important for us is to understand that these are clear and direct attempts by Republicans to, frankly, steal elections. I think we have Greg Palast. Greg, can you now hear me?
I can now hear you, Roland. Thank you.
Okay, there we go. Like I said earlier, Greg, this is clear and decisive plans of action by the Republican Party to try to shave off as many voters as possible, hundreds of thousands of voters, to suppress the vote because they are afraid, since the election of President Barack Obama in 2008, to see African Americans, to see Latinos, and even young white voters who do not like their policies come out in droves to vote.
That's correct. In fact, here's what we found. What I found is the ugliest Jim Crow that I can imagine since the 60s, since I was a kid. We have Brian Kemp has removed 500,000 voters from the voter rolls. He did so on the grounds that they've moved from the state, they've moved from their county. In fact, I had to threaten him with a federal lawsuit, me and the wonderful Helen Butler of the Georgia Coalition for People's Agenda. We got the list of every single person he's purged from the voter rolls. I'm not counting dead people, people in prison, any of that stuff. I'm counting people he said move. I then went to the top experts in voter address confirmation. Now, these are the guys, the catalog companies, you know, the bill collectors, all those who know exactly where you live. So I went to them, and I said, okay, here's all these people that Brian Kemp said move. They put it through a computer, and it was 340,134 Georgians who removed from the voter rolls, who still live in Georgia, live at the exact registration address where they originally had registered to vote. They're there, they want to vote, and they got no notice, zero, Joe, none, that they won't be able to vote in November. They're going to show up, those who want to vote, and they're going to be shocked. Now, a few of them went to gregpalace.com, that's my site, saw themselves on the purge roll, and they were able to re-register. Unfortunately, Roland, they were unable, today you can still re-register, but you still won't be able to vote on November 6th. It's ugly and it's racist. The method, by the way, picks out black people, young people, renters, poor people. It's ugly stuff.
Greg, here's one of the things that also I think is important that we are seeing. And we focus obviously on African Americans and Latinos, but what the Republicans are also doing, they are targeting young white voters. They're targeting elderly white voters. And I'm just trying to understand why white folks are not as angry about voter suppression. And remember, I talked about the Ohio case, the voter purge case. That was a white man from Ohio. And I have been saying to civil rights groups, stop solely focusing on voter suppression about the impact on black people and Latinos, that they need to be driving young white people and elderly white people. We saw this in Wisconsin, where they say some 200,000 people were impacted by voter ID. Even though the Obama Department of Justice certified that voter ID law, a federal judge called Governor Scott Walker into court and said, why are you dragging your feet on the issuing of voter ID laws? These laws are impacting young white people and elderly white people.
Oh, I can tell you it hits home. I know a young white woman who lives in Georgia. My daughter, she went through living hell to get to register as a Georgia voter, and because she's a student. And as far as I know, she told me there's 13,000 students in Savannah, and she told me that she's one of the only students who registered and was able to vote. They are doing their level best to remove the young white voter, because the young white voter and the middle-aged African-American voter vote, they're the same color voter. It's called blue, Democratic. That's what they're getting rid of. And low-income voters. Low-income whites, by the way, tend to vote Democratic in Georgia, despite the image of, the guys in the pickup trucks at the pig roast. But I can tell you this. I asked Brian Kemp about it. He refused to meet with me. So I went and I literally followed his campaign bus and stopped at a barbecue joint in a place called Noonan, Georgia. And in Noonan, I just wanted to ask him some questions. I said, well, are you purging the voter rolls of black voters and young voters so you can get elected? Why do I have to file a lawsuit to get the name of the purge voters? He had two of his galoots grab me and hustle me off this property. By the way, the owner of the property is unhappy. He says, I don't throw people off of my property. But, the truth is they don't want to answer the question. So now I am taking Brian Kemp into federal court. I filed this very morning in federal court in Atlanta. If he doesn't want to answer my questions next to his campaign bus, then excuse me, sir, you're going to answer the questions in front of a federal judge. My questions and the questions of the voting rights movement of Atlanta. We got a lot of support today from Gerald Griggs of the NAACP in Atlanta, from Joe Beasley of Rainbow Push. I got to tell you, but here's a sad one. While I have a lot of help from the African American press and young progressive press, like things like the Atlanta Journal-Constitution, are missing in action. The new Jim Crow is very uninteresting to the establishment because the establishment benefits by having their establishment candidates, and they're not going to give up that power so easily in Georgia.
All right, Greg Powell, we appreciate you being on this case. And again, we're going to keep pressing this issue. We're less than 20 days from Election Day, and we're going to do all we can to ensure that we call out the GOP as much as we can. We certainly appreciate it. Thanks a lot.
You're very welcome, Joe. I'll be back. Roland, bye.
All right, then again, folks, as we say, if there's a problem, you have to go when it comes to voting, you have to go see the county registrar. So today, the lawyers fighting the 53,000 registrations in Georgia on hold filed another motion to allow people to prove their citizenship right at the polling place. Now, because otherwise they would have to travel to a county office and then go back to the polling place to vote. As the lawyers wrote, this is burdensome for anyone, but particularly for those who reside in large counties, who rely on public or shared transportation, who typically walk to their polling location, or who have jobs or other time constraints that limit the amount of time they can spend voting. Right now, I want to go to my panel to talk about this here, so they can also weigh in on this in terms of what is going on. So let me first bring up Eugene Craig, CEO of the Eugene Craig Organization. Also joining us is Cleo Monago. Super Black is in the house. Cleo, glad to have you there as well. First of all, I want to make sure you guys can hear me. Eugene, you there?
Loud and clear, brother. Loud and clear.
We hear
all right, Cleo, you there as well?
Yes, I hear you. Dr. Cleo Monago can hear you.
Okay, so say it again.
I said Dr. Cleo Monago can hear you.
All right, there we go, Super Black. And we also have, of course, Brandon Cooper with Prince George's County Republican Party. I'm gonna go to you first, Eugene. The thing here again, when we talk about Republican and voter suppression, it's amazing to me how I hear people go, oh no, this is a voter suppression. When you see the purging, when you see what is happening in terms of on Monday, when you had a county official, when Black Votes Matter, they were going to take 30 senior citizens to the polling place, and some county official called the Senior Citizen Center and said, get them off of the bus, because they said, oh, we're concerned with a third party taking them. A third party can drive people to the polls.
Absolutely, absolutely. I mean, you know, the voter suppression tactics and operations are in full swing in Georgia and multiple other states. You know, to have 500,000, you know, voters, largely African American, purged from the voting rolls for no other reason, for literally no reason. I mean, it's been proven that, you know, quote unquote voter fraud largely is non-existent at every level. But, you know, what's going on in Georgia with these voter suppression tactics are absolutely despicable. They're racist. You know, they shouldn't be taking place. At every level.
But they're also old. And what I mean by that is that, with the exception of you, Roland, I don't hear about voter repression throughout the year. And I hear about it more around voting time than I hear previously. And this is something that's been happening on record since before 1946. So my concern, as you've heard me say many times, and hopefully people in position to do something about this hear this, is that why do we wait till before an election to talk about a cliche that we can almost predict is going to occur, particularly in the age of Trump, but preceding the age of Trump? My concern is our lack of anticipation regarding these norms of racist barriers to democracy. It's not new. It's been around a while. We should be prepared and be deflecting it before we get right before the vote.
Yeah, you know, me and you go back and forth, Roland, about certain tactics that we may disagree on, but I think clearly the purging of voters who are infrequently voting, to me, that's distasteful and, you know, targeting, as you pointed out, not just minorities, but also white voters who tend not to vote for the party that's doing it. So I think this is definitely a broader issue, an issue that's been going on, as Cleo mentioned, for a long time, and it's something that is impacting all communities across this country. And so I hate the politicization of the issue, and that's where me and you sometimes disagree. As Cleo was pointing out, I hate the fact that sometimes we get lost in minutia because parties on both sides take it to the hyper-partisan level and make it a political issue. Voting rights should be apolitical, whether you're Republican or Democrat, black or white. The access to the vote is the foundation of our democracy. And so I definitely agree that we need to be fighting these barriers, no matter who is behind them, to make sure that the right to vote accessible to all Americans.
But the issue is this. The issue is this. When it comes to voter suppression, it's largely one side taking part in it. I mean, you aren't hearing, Republicans in Philly or Houston or New York talking about their being purged from the voting rolls. But what you do see is you see, black folk and young white folk and college kids and, older, white people that don't necessarily vote Democrat. They're seeing themselves systematically purged from the voting rolls. You're seeing national commissions set up to purge people from the voting rolls. I mean, I'm of the belief of that. Hey, even as a Republican, you fight for every vote. I don't need you to deny people their constitutionally protected right to vote in order to win an election. And that's what's happening. I mean, it's a partisan issue because one side is overwhelmingly involved in the impact of it.
It is a partisan issue. And earlier, Roland, you mentioned that women who voted 53% for Trump and young whites were backing off from Trump based on a poll. I think we should be concerned about these polls because there were polls back before Trump became president that predicted that Hillary was going to win, and these polls can be very incorrect. I don't trust these polls, and I really don't trust in terms of what white people say in public and what they do in private. Sometimes they say one thing and do another to save faces so they won't look like they're racist. So I'm concerned about us taking these polls too seriously.
And I agree, Eugene, that the voter suppression, I don't like that term in particular because it lumps everything together. You don't get into the minutia of each one. But the voter suppression tactics you talked about definitely are limited to one party. But voter disenfranchisement, I do not think is limited to one party. And you look at here in Maryland, we talk about that a lot. But the NAACP back in 2010 came out with complaints against the Democrat-controlled legislator in Maryland for chopping up black communities in order to, again, get favorable districts for Democrats. And so I think the issue of voter disenfranchisement is definitely visible on both sides of the aisle.
Brandon?
Yes, sir. Yes.
Brandon, there's a distinct difference. Brandon, there's a difference. There's a difference between gerrymandering and voter suppression. Gerrymandering
I said it was
is a fundamental problem in this country.
Right.
The Supreme Court recently, in the case they had in Wisconsin, they booted it back to the lower court, and they never really decided it. The issue that we're talking about here is, again, when you have all these tactics being used to shave people off the polls. And Eugene, I got to ask you, and I've been saying this now for 2 or 3 years. When are we going to see a group of black Republicans stand up and say, damn it, Republican Party, stop suppressing people's voting rights, especially African Americans?
I'll give you a very candid answer. You may see a small select group emerge to do something like that. There are some discussions taking place, but you probably won't see a larger group, especially among the super MAGA folk. I personally, the super Make America Great Again folk, the super MAGA folk, the folk that run around the red hat, as if it's, their Superman cape. But I can tell you personally, if you want a record of it, I can give you a record of it. I've asked, I'm in part of a group of about 60, 70 black Republicans, and I said it straight up. I said, listen, when are we going to take a stance against this? Anybody down for oppressor? I had one person respond. The Katrina Pearsons were silent. The Lynn Pattons were silent. You're super. You have a lot of folk that as long as their vested interest is in working through the party system, or making sure they don't piss off Team Trump, or make sure that they can be the voice of hey, this isn't necessarily quote unquote racist. You're not going to see it. But I can say that on the flip side, there is a small group of black conservatives, black Republicans that are talking through and working through just that. Coming together and putting our foot down and saying, listen. If you want us to go out and grab black votes, if you want us to help diversify the party, if you want us to take the message to communities that you are terrified and afraid to step into, then you need to do your part and stop with these voter suppression tactics.
At the risk of offending, my Republican brothers who might be an exception to this, from my experience in talking to Republicans, which I do all the time, black Republicans, many of them become Republican as opposed to Democrat to step away from race-based discussions and race-based politics and want to be more neutral, more capitalist-oriented or do something other than what the Democrats do, which is often so-called race bait. So the idea of having taken an opportunity to discuss the real issue of racism and racism-based voter repression doesn't compute, because now they got to talk about race, which is one of the reasons why them step into the Republican Party in the first place. So you keep asking that question, Roland, but there's a kind of a meltdown that occurs, because I've been hearing you ask. I knew you were going to disagree, but whether you disagree or not, I've watched Roland, and I myself have been connected to the show for some years, have asked the same question: why you black folks won't step up for black folks? Why you black folks won't step up against white racists who are predominantly in your party against what they're doing to purge black people from the voting opportunity? And I keep getting crickets.
If we talk, let's talk some facts here. All right, let's talk some facts here.
Okay, so hold one second. I want Brandon to respond, and then I gotta play this next ad because I can't wait to hear the three of y'all gotta say about this one. Brandon, go ahead.
All I'll say, man, you called me up earlier talking about the issue between gerrymandering and voter suppression. I pointed out, and I agree with you 100%, as I said, that the tactics of the Republican Party to purge voters from the rolls who don't vote frequently is limited to our party, and it is wrong. So don't try to walk over that aspect as if I'm not agreeing with you. What I was saying was the issue of voter disenfranchisement is an issue. I know you don't want to talk about it because it goes beyond your narrative that you're trying to push, but it is an issue that matters to me, and I think it should matter to your viewers as well. Whether it's the Republican Party or Democrat Party doing it, we're talking about voter rights here, and I'm just saying I was trying to expand it to the topic of disenfranchisement that's happening when Democrats gerrymander black communities to lessen our influence at the polls. It's something the NAACP has called out as well. So that was my point. I was not trying to walk past the voter suppression topic, which I agree with you on. I was just adding another layer to the topic. But back to Cleo's point about the politicalization of it, I think, again, part of the issue where we disagree is the hyper-partisan nature of this conversation that is used to push your narrative. Going back to that video you showed about Kemp and the video of the black voter that you conveniently left off the fact that there were actually 3 videos that were produced. And there was one of the other videos that produced showed a black boy, African-American boy, who was able to vote. And so again, you limit it. No, but again, because it causes controversy in this nature. But again, the hyper-partisan nature of it that's used to push your narrative, while you leave out facts that don't agree with your narrative. There was another video that you not show.
When you don't have a history of blocking black people, that's what happens. All right, guys, hold on 1 second.
Oh my God! Really quickly.
1 second. 1 second. I need everybody quiet.
What you're seeing, Roland, what you're seeing right here.
I need everybody quiet.
Yeah.
Here's the deal. Voter registration deadlines for the next 4 days. October 22nd, Alabama, California, South Dakota. Those are your deadlines. October 26th, Nebraska. That is your deadline. October 29th, the state of Washington. That is your deadline. October 30th, Utah and Connecticut. Those are all of your deadlines to vote. And so, again, we want you to do your part. To get out there and vote and deal with that. And so we want to make sure, again, that you are dealing with that. I got to do this here, folks. And so someone from Arkansas sent me this radio ad, which is running on black radio stations in Arkansas in support of Republican Congressman French Hill. I'm going to play it, and I can't wait to have our panelists react. Folks, brace yourself for this actual ad being put out by a black Republican group.
What do you think about what's happening in Washington?
Our Congressman French Hill and the Republicans know that it's dangerous to change the presumption of innocence to a presumption of guilt, especially for black men. If the Democrats can do that to a white justice of the Supreme Court with no evidence, no corroboration, and all of her witnesses, including her best friend, say it didn't happen, what will happen to our husbands, our fathers, or our sons when a white girl lies on them?
Girl, white Democrats will be lynching black folk again.
Honey, I've always told my son, don't be messing around with that. If you get caught, she will cry rape.
I'm voting to keep Congressman French Hill and the Republicans because we have to protect our men and boys. We can't afford to let white Democrats take us back to bad old days of race verdicts, life sentences, and lynchings when a white girl screams rape.
Paid for by black Americans for the president's agenda. Not authorized by any candidate or candidates committee.
Damn.
Black Americans for the President's Agenda is headed by Vernon Robinson,
yep.
who's going to be on Roland Martin Unfiltered on Monday. Now, Congressman French and his opponent, Clark Tucker, both have condemned the ad. Cleo, what do you think?
Okay, that was an ad by Black Republicans?
Yeah,
Vernon, yes, a Black Republican group took that ad out in support of the white Republican running in Arkansas, saying that if you vote for the white Democrat, then you're going to be voting for somebody who's going to put black people in jail for dating a white woman.
That's a sign of schizophrenic desperation. I mean, damn. I'm just going. This is unfiltered. I can say damn, right? Okay, because damn. I mean, that's very interesting. I have never heard on tape what Black Republicans take that approach. Now, I want to ask my Republican brothers: is this an anomaly, or is this something that has been done before among people who are called Black Republicans?
I'll say this. I got a couple points here. First and foremost, Vernon Robinson is a scam pack artist. Anybody that could do any research on him and look and see what he did with Ben Carson's Super PAC, Run, Ben, Run. I mean, you raise $12 million. You literally spend like 12.3 and after you take his cut. You know, what he's doing with this is absolutely despicable. I mean, just on the facts alone, I'm sorry, you know, show me where, you know, Republican congressmen that he support have, you know, taken up and backed, you know, bipartisan criminal justice legislation. Show me where Republicans have let their, you know, their name and their weight to, you know, situations involving Tamir Rice and Trayvon Martin. You know, and to answer your particular question, things may not necessarily play out in the way, you know, you may not necessarily see ads produced like this, but the sentiment of that, hey, you know, I'll use my blackness and tie it to being a Republican to cape for almost anything. Absolutely.
Except for against voter repression.
Except voter repression.
Yeah, because I mean, where's the ad with the white woman being you know, the warning?
Or where is he throwing, you know, putting cash or his weight behind, you know, hey, you know, I'm going to put my foot down and say I'm not producing or raising money for any Republicans that aren't taking a stance against this.
That's why I call it. That's why I call it desperate schizophrenia.
This is how you know, Black Republicans, you know, maintain their edge, maintain their quote-unquote clout, for less of a better term, you know, by taking actions like this. I mean, this is absolutely, you know, despicable, deplorable.
And I'll just...
Final comment on this topic, Brandon.
Yeah, just real quickly, two things. One, point out also that the Republican candidate, also the state GOP party in Arkansas, came out against this ad. But to Eugene's point, 100% right. I don't know Vernon Jordan, but there are a lot of Black Republicans in the party.
No. Vernon Robinson. No, not Vernon Jordan. Vernon Robinson.
I don't know. I'm sorry.
Okay.
Vernon Robinson. But anyways, this speaks to the fact that there are a lot of white Republicans in the party who love getting their black friend out to trot out front. You said with this, you know, I don't know how many people are in this PAC. Usually these PACs are ran by one person. But it is a problem, and they love to get these Black Republicans love to cater favor to the white Republicans and to do what they're bidding. I don't know how you raise $50,000 in order to run this. I'd love to see the donors. But yeah, there definitely is a problem. It's a horrible ad, and I'm glad that the state party in Arkansas and also his opponent has came out against the ad.
I'll tell you, the same white folks who give Raynard Jackson money.
It's a list of them.
It's there.
A big
All right, today, the Department of Justice indicted a Russian woman with ties to Putin for using a misinformation campaign on social media to sow discord in the U.S. ahead of the midterm elections. Two of the issues she used to divide us were race relations and the kneeling of football players. One of the messages from Russian interference in 2018 elections pushed Judicial Watch's claim that voter fraud was rampant in, quote, blue states without voter ID. Joining us now is Terrell Starr, a senior reporter at The Root and an expert on Russia. Terrell, how you doing?
Doing great. Thank you for having me.
It is clear, anybody who understands Putin, he believes, frankly, in white supremacy. And he has got a partner in crime in Donald Trump. And it's clear that the Russians and Donald Trump has done nothing to stop them from meddling in American elections.
Right, absolutely. And one thing that we have to consider in all of this is that on the American side, what has the White House done to educate the public about disinformation campaigns? In fact, Mr. Trump, he consistently, for a long time, has denied Russian interference at all. Then he kind of stutters steps and says, well, yeah, maybe they did. Ultimately, and I've reported on this throughout the year, is that the American election system whether it be cybersecurity with our critical infrastructure or through disinformation campaigns. Our American states are very much unprepared for it. And particularly through media, if you noticed, if you read some of the reports on this recent indictment, on these recent charges, is that a lot of the American media have been using these Russian bots, Twitter accounts, and inserting them into stories. And so there is a media education that not only readers and viewers need to partake in, but also media producers like myself, like you and others, who need to look at what type of information an account is producing, whether or not that person is real or not. So this is pretty much a new stage in our, in our media era where we have to be a lot more careful about what we're consuming. But unfortunately, the leadership from the White House seems not to take it seriously. And during these midterms, we very well could suffer for that.
And of course, to have the Department of Justice make this move, I mean, it's critically important because Vladimir Putin also recently gave a speech where he said that America's iron grip on the world, frankly, is loosening and is almost extinct. I mean, this is a man who, again, wanted to destabilize the United States, and he clearly favored Donald Trump. And he's gotten somebody who's attacked NATO, who's attacked many of our other allies. And the fact that Donald Trump refused to even give states any level of direction when it came to trying to protect the voting system, it shows that he doesn't care. In fact, he still is insisting China and others have been involved in this when the intelligence agencies in America have said, no, it's the Russians.
Well, that's very true. But one thing you have to realize is that, like, President Vladimir Putin, Donald Trump is pretty much somebody who's turned the White House into a kleptocracy, just like Putin has turned Russia into a kleptocracy. Trump is very much, he has authoritarian tendencies. The only reason why America has not declined even faster is that we do have a civil society. We do have structures in government that protect against overpowerful and overzealous executive office. That's just not the case in Russia. And so you see Trump as somebody who really wants to be a dictatorial character. But again, the only thing that's maintaining that is our civil society. Now, and I talked to a lot of my colleagues about this, particularly my white journalist colleague. Ultimately, what is America learning about its own racial issues? So we can spend so much time talking about President Putin and what he's done through the Kremlin to approve disinformation campaigns, cyber attacks. But ultimately, what about the racial issues that are going on here? Because ultimately, all that's doing is stoking up and really taking advantage of issues that took place long before Russia became involved. And so that's the wider conversation that we must have. And I think the number one culprit in not really leading the conversation on this has been mainstream media. And so you can point to Russia, you can point to the Kremlin, or wherever entity in Russia you choose. But ultimately, these are people who are choosing to believe this information. So what about them? What about their education? And that comes down to having very difficult conversations about race that people are not willing to have. And ultimately, that's something that you can't leave at Russia's doorstep.
All right, Terrell Starr, I appreciate it. And one reason I wanted to have you on, because it's important for us to show that there are black people who are experts in Russia beyond Condoleezza Rice. And I know you're working on a book on that, so we appreciate it, brother.
Oh, thank you very much.
All right, thanks a bunch. Folks, we talked about the importance of black women when it comes to getting the vote out, but what about electing black women? There's a political action committee called Higher Heights Political Action Committee that is doing that, focusing on black women governing. Their focus to educate, train, and elect the next generation of black female politicians. Joining me right now is the co-founder of Higher Heights, Kimberly Peeler Allen. Kimberly, how you doing?
I'm well. How are you?
Great to have you. We're seeing Ayanna Pressley, of course, who is running for Congress from Massachusetts. We're seeing, look, you've got a sister who is a former Teacher of the Year in Connecticut who is running. You've got a black woman, of course, who's in Congress now from Delaware. And we are seeing black women step up in so many different places across the country. But one of the issues they have is the lack of funding and the resources and support to help them run for office.
Absolutely. The barriers for Black women to step into elected leadership are unfortunately very great, but we're seeing at this time this unprecedented number of Black women running at the statewide, the federal, and the local level. And in this climate, the electorate is ready for Black women's leadership. So we're really excited about the opportunity to elect, hopefully, the first Black woman elected governor in our nation's history in Georgia, as well as growing the number of Black women in Congress from 20 to hopefully 26 to 28.
How much money has your PAC raised, and what are your long-term goals? Are you only looking at women who are running on the congressional side or the United States Senate, or are you looking at statewide as well as county, city, local races as well?
So Higher Heights for America PAC is supported by the members of Higher Heights for America, and we are really focused on not just contributing directly to our candidates, but also mobilizing Black women across the country and our allies to support these candidates. So whether it is making sure that we have a robust volunteer operation going into all of these campaigns, or that they are hosting their own fundraisers and supporting events and supporting the campaigns, and as well as talking about their campaigns on social media. So we are focused right now on candidates at the federal level, as well as statewide executive office, and the mayors of the top 100 cities. So last year, we were very focused on making sure 2017 was the year of the Black woman mayor, and we went from 4 Black women mayors to now 7, which is a record high, serving simultaneously. And we're just really excited about the opportunity to really mobilize Black women, not just to give the financial contributions, though that is critically important, but also spread the word and mobilize a network that will actually also do the work to make sure that these women have what they need, both in person power and finances, to effectively run, win, and lead.
All right, then. We're Kimberly Peeler-Allen. First of all, how can somebody reach you if they want to support Higher Heights Political Action Committee?
You can find us on the web at higherheightsforamericapac.org. On social media, we are at Higher Height PAC on Twitter and on Facebook.
All right, Kimberly Peeler-Allen, we appreciate it. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
All right, folks. On Wednesday, I was in Memphis, of course, for the 27th Annual Freedom Award presented by the National Civil Rights Museum. This weekend, Roland Martin Unfiltered, we are going to be live streaming, restreaming that award ceremony. Among the 3 honorees were Reverend Jesse Jackson Sr. and Vice President Joe Biden. This is what Reverend Jesse Jackson Sr. Had to say during his acceptance speech before the packed audience at the Memphis Orpheum Theater.
We're here tonight not because Dr. King died, because he lived. Tonight, the focus remains on poverty, racial polarization, and peace over unwinnable wars. You focus on early voting. What would he be doing tonight? What would he be doing tonight? He would be focused on early voting, which began in Tennessee today. He'd be celebrating the light that came to Shelby County in the last election. If in fact, if this room were pitch dark and there were no lights, one candle would challenge all the darkness. The power of light. A lot of darkness coming out of Washington these days, a lot of darkness. Attacking the women, then mimicking them, darkness. Attacking journalists, saying they're a threat to democracy. Sending them up to be hurt and killed, darkness. Babies locked up in cages on borders as a strategy to turn immigration, darkness. Attacking our neighbors, the north and Canada, the south and Mexico, Germany and Britain, darkness. Attacking NATO, giving a comfort zone to Putin, darkness. And yet, when it's darkest, you see the stars more clearly. It's dark, but there's O'Rourke in Texas. There's a light coming out of Texas. It's dark, but where Emmett Till was killed, there's now Mike Esper running for senator in Mississippi. It's dark, but where there was Rosewood in Florida, the stolen election in 2000, there's now Gillum running for senator, for governor in Florida. It's dark in Georgia, where Maddox held up an axe handle to threaten our freedoms. And now Stacey Abrams is going to be the next governor of Georgia. Dark in Maryland, where Frederick Douglass escaped to, but Ben Jealous is running for governor and leading the polls. Give it up for Ben. Memphis has never gotten its fair deal in this analysis of this season. Memphis is the capital of the Delta. And while we as Christians appreciate the role of Bethlehem, our redemption comes from Calvary. The resurrection does not take place far from the crucifixion. Atlanta is not the king's Bethlehem, but Memphis is his Calvary. Bad news is the Calvary. The good news is the resurrection takes place not far from the crucifixion. I close on this note. When Jesus was crucified, they went back to the tomb, but he was not there. They didn't have a lot of celebration around the tomb. He was not there. We go to the museum, but he is not there. He is searching for people to register and vote and regain their sense of consciousness and confidence. He is somewhere making crooked ways straight and exalting valleys. He's somewhere trying to free the unjust jailed. He knows that there are those who are free should be jailed, and there are those in jail who should be free. He would be somewhere tonight trying to exalt us to another level of consciousness and love one another as he has loved us. Lastly, we learn to survive apart. But we have a greater lesson, learning to live together. The Civil Rights Movement won in the South. We couldn't use a single public toilet. We couldn't rent a room at Holiday Inn with money. We couldn't buy ice cream at Howard Johnson's. Black and brown soldiers sat behind Nazis on the American military base in 1962. But tonight, we have won those battles. And so I say to you tonight, don't give up, and don't go weary well doing. There is still yet a great kingdom. I've seen a lot in my life and time, but my spirit leads me to feeling good about tonight, because in all I've seen, all the places I've been, I have never seen the righteous forsaken. Not their seed beg for bread. God bless you.
I can go in between 4 and 4. All right, folks. First of all, we're going to go to a break right now. And thank you, Reverend Jackson. Don't forget, we're going to be live streaming. The Freedom Awards this weekend. Also, just so y'all know, I'm broadcasting live from the Young Turks studio here in Los Angeles. And then in about 10 minutes, I'm actually going to be going live with the Young Turks. And so I'm also communicating with their producers. So when I finish, I'll walk right over to their studio and join them there. So right now, I'm going to go to a break. And then we come back. We're going to talk with a book author about the power of the black press historically. This is Roland Martin Unfiltered.
I don't care about politics. Look, I don't care about Pokemon, but that doesn't mean it won't keep on coming back. That's actually what people in power are betting on, that you'll check out, that you won't vote. And when you opt out, that's what allows other people to essentially fill that void. It allows them to do nothing about the things that you'd like to see government do. So if you really want to throw a wrench in their plans, Throw them out. Vote in somebody better. Next. Why bother voting when I can't relate to the candidates? Now, this is actually a good question. For way too long, politicians haven't been representative of America as a whole. But that's changing this year. More women are running for office than ever before. More LGBT candidates are running for office. First-time candidates, young veterans of Iraq and Afghanistan, young leaders from across the political spectrum. So this year, more than any other year, you have the chance to change the face of politics so that it looks more like your own. You remember those hearings where members of Congress were asking Mark Zuckerberg questions like they'd never used the internet before? That's because they haven't. Here's your chance to vote for people who actually know what the internet is.
All right, folks. I'm going to take a little break right here, talk about one of our sponsors, freeprints.com. If you're like me, you want to be able to sometimes print out photos, not just email folks or airdrop those photos, then you need to have a source. Where freeprints.com allows you to get 1,000 photos, 1,000 4x6 photos that you can actually print out at a nominal cost. They'll be shipped directly to you. You can print not just from your phone, but also from Instagram, Facebook, or even Twitter as well. It is the top app out there, some 100,000 5-star ratings. If you go to Google Play or go to iTunes, you can actually download their app, freeprints.com. But do me a favor, when they ask what did you hear about them, what's the promo code, put in the name Roland, R-O-L-A-N-D, so they know that our followers, our viewers, are the ones where they actually saw this. And so we will surely appreciate you do that. And so support those who are supporting us. So I want you to support freeprints.com. All right, folks, as you know, I'm very much about black media and the importance of black media. And there's a new book out that talks about how critically important black media is, even in this time right now, in terms of we're looking at the election. Cleo made the point early in terms of not hearing as much about voter suppression on other networks as you're hearing right here on Roland Martin Unfiltered. That's the case with the Time Journal Morning Show. That was the case when I had my TV One show. None of those things have changed because we understand how critically important these issues are compared to mainstream media. And so as a result, we want to talk about that. Here's my next guest. And first of all, it's a great book. And I want you guys, his name is, of course, Fred Carroll. His name is Fred Carroll. And so the book is called Race News, Black Journalists and the Fight for Racial Justice in the 20th Century. Fred, glad to have you here.
Well, thank you, Roland. I appreciate you asking me to be on.
Bottom line is this here. When you look at the 20th century, it hasn't changed in the 21st century, that the people who care most about black people are those who are black journalists who are getting those stories told.
I think that's true, and that if you look at, and I think that this all goes back to the doctrine of objectivity, right? Objectivity defaults to the status quo. And so by defaulting to the status quo, that means that any group that is marginalized in society is going to struggle to have their voices heard, even as the mainstream press has shifted from being an exclusively white press to being a more inclusive press.
And Fred, when you talk about in terms of the roles there, we're even seeing it today among black journalists that the issues that we know are critically important to our people, we know how to talk about them. In fact, the other day, the folks with the Common Good, they actually have a political panel taking place at Hunter College next week. And Hunter College is 65% people of color. The political panel discussing the 2018 midterm elections is all white. A perfect example of leaving out critically important voices.
Yes, right. Well, the problem, so with the doctrine of objectivity, right, is that there's no reform impulse there. And so my book, looks at Black journalism across the 20th century. And one of the things that I look at is how the commercial Black press, and here we're talking like the Pittsburgh Courier, the New York Amsterdam News, Chicago Defender, Baltimore Afro-American, those types of newspapers, what they do after World War II, as the Cold War's taken shape and as anti-communism is growing as a movement, they distance themselves from the radical impulse that had actually, I think, enlivened their journalism in between the two world wars. And once they remove this sort of radical impulse with very good pragmatic reasons, right? They're trying to protect their businesses. But what they do is they sort of rob their journalism of a sense of mission, of a sense of posing an alternative to a racist status quo. And I think that you can see parallels, right, like with that to objectivity today, because objectivity doesn't come at a viewpoint from a moral perspective, right? It'll just say, well, this side says this and this side says that. And then I think that what the journalists, Black journalists throughout the 20th century were doing was like, yeah, this side says this side says this, and this side is trying, but this side is trying to actually uphold the promise of the Declaration of Independence. This side is actually trying to say, to fulfill America's highest ideals, which is something that objectivity never really allows journalists to maneuver and try to fulfill.
Yep. All right, then. The book is called Race News, Black Journalists in the Fight for Racial Equality, Racial Justice in the 20th Century by Fred Carroll. Fred, we certainly appreciate it, man. Thanks a lot.
No problem. Thank you.
All right, folks, we got about 3 minutes left in our show. I want to go to my panel. We talked about higher heights, trying to get Black women to run for office. Reverend Jackson's comments with the Freedom Award, of course, that book as well. All right, Eugene, you can start. You can address any one of those. Go.
Yeah, I think higher heights is absolutely needed. Going from 2018, 2020, 22, and beyond, when you empower Black women to run for office and put them in power, you see communities change overnight.
I just want to mention,
Cleo Monago.
Yeah, I want to mention that I'm glad that you uplift Jesse Jackson, because a lot of people forget him among the young people, so maybe they'll remember him because of your efforts. But what he said about Ben Jealous in Maryland is not true. Ben Jealous only has like 20% of the vote according to polls. Also, one of the questions that came to my mind during the segment on Black women being more involved in politics and getting these positions is I want to have a conversation maybe another day about what difference is this making on the ground in terms of things improving for Black people, that Black people get into these traditional positions of politics. That's a discussion that we don't have time for, but that's what crosses my mind, is what difference does it make? And I know that when Obama was president, when it came to knowledge and beliefs and attitudes among Black people, didn't a lot of things change regarding them feeling more empowered politically? Matter of fact, as you know, when it was time to go to the polls to vote, a lot of people still didn't turn out. So I'm just wondering, what difference does it make beyond symbology?
Yeah, and just piggyback on that, I know you mentioned, we always talk about how Black women are the most loyal demographic for the Democrat Party. And I know we used to have Dr. Avis Weaver on the panel with me sometimes talking about the issues she's having. But kind of to Cleo's point, it'd be interesting to find out, is that a record amount of mayors, a record amount of elected Black women rising, particularly in the Democrat Party? How's that translating to influence in the party in that nature? And also back to Jesse Jackson, we may disagree on some political issues, but I have to agree that he's been a fighter for our community and putting what's right first. And I just want to echo his points that Ben Jealous is not up in Maryland as a member of the Maryland Republican Party. He's down by about 20 points and doesn't look good coming out of the election in about 3 weeks.
All right, folks, let me thank all of you for being with us and all of our guests today. Folks, don't forget, you can support RolandMartinUnfiltered.com, this show by going to RolandMartinUnfiltered.com and joining our Bring the Funk fan club. We certainly appreciate that. Folks, don't forget, we'll be live streaming all of our shows this weekend, including my conversation one-on-one last night with Jason Whitlock, and the Freedom Awards from the National Civil Rights Museum. We'll be live streaming that this weekend as well. Plus, I'm here in LA for the Taste of Soul. Look out for that live stream as well, folks. This is why we are here, giving you stuff nobody else will, because this is no laughing matter. We can't spend our time talking about jokes and just watching the same sort of nonsense. We need to be feeding our minds plus feeding our souls. Folks, thanks a bunch. Y'all have a great weekend. Everybody here in LA with Roland Martin Unfiltered, have a great one. Holla!